Welcome to the Behavioral View, presented by CentralReach. Join hosts, Dr. Shannon Hill and Dr. Nissa Van Etten, as they explore cutting-edge topics in behavior analysis with expert guests. Stay informed, stay inspired. This is the Behavioral View.
Hi, everyone. This is just a little note of clarification that we recorded this episode in July of 2025 for professional development purposes for RBTs. And we will be re-releasing it in January 2026, so our new listeners will be able to get CEUs for this episode. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Behavioral View for the month of July 2025. We are here today to talk about things for RBTs because RBTs, guess what? You have got CEUs coming up, and we want to get prepared for all of that. So, my name is Shannon Hill. I'm editor-in-chief here at CentralReach Institute. And who is with me, as always, is my good friend and coworker and boss, Nissa. Nissa, you want to say hi?
Yes, hey everyone. Nissa Van Etten. I'm the Director of Clinical Training and CR Institute here at CentralReach.
And we have been working hard this year to kind of introduce you to all of the behavior analytic professionals who are willing to come on the Behavioral View, who are working at CentralReach. So we have 3 for you today that I don't think that we have introduced to our listeners before. So I'm going to let you guys go one at a time and just kind of introduce yourselves. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
My name is Christina Savoy. I also go by my nickname Kiki, and I'm a board-certified behavior analyst and customer success lead here at CentralReach.
And thank you. So when you say I also go by, what do you want to be today? Are you formal or informal today?
Let's go informal. I'll go by Kiki.
We'll go by Kiki then. Thank you. Kiki is serving as our panelist number 3. And then our special guests have some deep experience in the world of RBTs. So Bradley, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Bradley Fine. I'm an account manager here at CentralReach. But kind of like Shannon said, before this, I was BT for a few years. Also have a master's in ABA.
Perfect. And rounding us out today is Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm a solutions consultant at CentralReach. I am coming from the field of ABA for over 16 years as both a clinician and an admin.
Wonderful. Nissa, I don't remember. Did you ever work as a BT or did you miss that?
It was before there were BT, so I was a therapist or a tutor, and all kinds of different roles.
Well, let's just roll us straight into our question of the day, which is tell us a little bit about your first job in ABA. So you were kind of already starting this, so you want to just finish that thought?
Yeah. I worked as a tutor. That's what they called me way back when. This is 1999, year 2000. I worked in-home with 2 little boys with autism in Orange County, California, and that's where I fell in love with the field. It just made sense, replacing challenging behavior with language, playing all day long. I felt like all I did was play, and I had a ton of fun. So that was my first job in the field.
Awesome. How about you, Liz?
My first job in the field, I was a behavior tech, so this was pre-RBT certification. And that kind of jump-started me on the road to working in the ABA field for almost 2 decades. Worked with several little kiddos, really just fell in love with the kids and the job, and that's why I stayed for so long.
I hear that quite often. Kiki, what did you do?
I actually started off on the admin side. My title was chair coordinator. It was kind of intake specialist and scheduler mashed up. But I didn't really know what ABA was when I started in that admin role. So I had asked my supervisor if I could shadow one of the behavior technicians, and it took exactly 1 shadowing session for me to realize I was on the wrong side and needed to get on the clinical end.
That is amazing. Yeah. Riley, how did it happen for you?
Yeah, it was 6 years ago at this point. I was graduating college, had a psych degree. I was kind of looking for what was next, had a kind of background in like coaching kids in Little League, and kind of had that psych degree, so kind of found ABA, mashed them together, went to be at a BT for a few years, and kind of the normal cut and dry, one-on-one direct services, working in home, pair training trickled in there. Obviously with getting the master's, did some of that field work obviously as well. Yeah, it was pretty much just kind of perfect storm of coming out of college, liked working with kids, knew about ABA through school, and ended up being BT for a few years. So
That, it's a different world now than it was when I stumbled into this field, because I was also in college, but I just needed a job because my parents gave me a limited budget for my living arrangements. I didn't want to be in the dorm anymore. So I had a friend who was working at a state facility for adults with intellectual disabilities. So I stumbled in via direct care route. So I was actually hired for, making sure that everybody got clean and fed and entertained. And along with that were behavior plans that we were supposed to do while we did everything else. And that just really grabbed me. And I was hooked, just like you guys are describing. Once you get a little taste and you see something work, you're like, wow, look what that can do. So for those of you who are watching us, when we were doing the initial meetings for this, we really wanted to focus in on giving some tips to RBTs or soon to be RBTs on things that we wish we had known when we were entering the field. But as we got to talking, we thought, there's an angle here for supervisors as well. So for today's edition, we're going to really focus on the RBT side of things, but I'm hoping that we will come back around in a few months and do a parallel episode for supervisors who want to make sure that they transition people in a way that encourages them to stay in the field and to grow in the field. But all right, let's get this kicked off. Things I didn't know that I wish I did when I was entering this field. It would have made it easier to adjust in. What comes to mind for you guys?
I mean, we talked about the play aspect and the pairing for sure. So I think coming into ABA, the most intimidating thing is you would think would be, all the acronyms, data collection, all these like strategies you need to know, when to know them, why you're using them, why you would use one when, and why another one isn't appropriate in another situation. And I think what, for me anyway, that got really I overlooked, honestly, was just kind of, especially with the age group I worked in, which was kind of like ages 3 to 7 primarily, was just kind of being a kid again, and just being reinforcing so that they enjoy the session with you, right? If you're in a family's home for 3 hours, you want the client to see you as reinforcing. It's like, oh, you have a session with Bradley, this is going to be super fun. They're not dreading it because all I'm doing for 3 hours is putting them through DTT and stopping them from eloping. So I think what gets overlooked is just kind of being prepared to get out of your comfort zone. And, when I started as BT, I was 21 coming out of college. So obviously who I was with in the day-to-day and working in restaurants, then all of a sudden on Monday I'm working with kids. It was a big shift. And I think that's one that I, in hindsight, should have thought about going forward. But again, you're learning so much. You're getting certified from positive reinforcement to getting CPR training, basics like that, that just playing with kids, assuming that's the age group you're working with, gets overlooked. And I know something that helped me is kind of leaning into what I was comfortable with at first, which was kind of like the physical play. So doing like piggyback rides, swinging the kids around, whatever it may be, pushing them on a swing. And then when it came to, I struggle with imaginary play, to be quite honest. That was just something that I had to kind of push myself to do. And eventually got there. But I think that is kind of the biggest aspect, is just the reinforcement and just the pairing.
I don't think you're alone, because that is one of the most common course requests that we get, is how to teach someone how to pair, how to teach them to build rapport, and even the very specific how to play. So I do think that's something that is just going to feed into, and a lot of people will agree with in their own experiences. I mean, for me, when you mentioned restaurant work, that's exactly what I did. I went from being a waitress to direct care staff, and honestly, I made more money as a waitress.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because if you can hit rapport as a waitress, you have tips in your pocket. So it wasn't so much about rapport building for me. What I think I wish I had known or really understand better was the power of the intermittent reinforcement schedule, because you can work so very hard and be so on point, and then there's a slip and mostly I was dealing with challenging behaviors, so there's a slip and that behavior just sticks, and it's very defeating after you've worked so hard, and just that one little time where somebody, maybe me, was the one who accidentally reinforced the behavior when I wasn't supposed to, how far back that would set us, especially if you're working with older clients who have a long reinforcement history. It would have helped me, I think, to understand that bit of the science so that I wasn't so, I don't know, flattened emotionally when something like that happened.
I think that's another good point, though, is that you're going to make mistakes. I mean, even the most seasoned staff who've done it for decades will make mistakes. You will reinforce the wrong thing, or you will laugh at something they said, and you shouldn't have. And now that's going to be their word for the next, 2 weeks. Everybody makes mistakes and everybody does the wrong thing. And it's not the end of the world. And I had to treat a lot of people and tell them, like, you're going to mess up. You're going to do the wrong thing. And it's not the end of the world. Like, we'll deal with it. We'll figure it out. We'll get back on track. But we're all humans. So you can't expect that we're not going to make a mistake. And you can't expect the kids not to make a mistake. So you got to give yourself that same grace that you give the kids.
I think what I wish I would have known, I think it piggybacks off of that topic, is just to ask for help, especially as a new, therapist in the field, trying to understand how to pair and be fun and goofy is, if I'm working with a learner that's more challenging, maybe I need backup or support. I need to reach out to my BCBA. I think that was something I didn't do often. I tried to figure it out on my own. I tried to maybe apply an intervention incorrectly because I didn't understand what was written on the sheet. And I think I would have asked for more help early on if I had access. Again, this was a different time. There wasn't technology available to ask for that type of help immediately. But when my supervisors were present, I wanted to always be a great therapist and run the programs the way I thought they were designed. And it was probably incorrect some of the time.
Yeah, Nissa, on that too, I think like asking the why is also extremely important when you're new. So it's, we're reinforcing it for this or using X strategy, but professionally asking the BCBA, like, why are we doing this? I think help clears up a lot of things, especially if something like novel pops up, or even just becoming, a better therapist. Just understanding the why, like why things are used. Why is it used in this way when another client were using it in a different manner? So I think that one goes a long way too, when it comes to kind of learning the techniques and everything in ABA.
The why is what pulled me into this. So when I said running those behavior plans, our behavior plans back then were a combination of psychological report and the behavior intervention strategies. So that background of seeing what happened and then transitional paragraphs explaining in the past to what we're going to do now really lit something up in me. And I was not a psych major. I was an English major. So, but by the way, if you don't know, those things are very similar. I think that not only does it help you understand what you're doing in the here and now, but it really helps you develop your ABA understanding and your viewpoint of the world as a behavior analyst or a behavior analytic professional is what I should be saying here. Because we have a very specific way of looking at the world in determining what we're doing and why we're doing that. So I love that.
And it's a learning process. Like I mean, every once in a while you get somebody that's new to it and they're like an absolute rock star. But for the majority of us, like you a good staff and a good therapist because you've done this with so many different kids over so many different years, and you've worked so many different behavior plans and you've seen so many different behaviors, and it's just this like accumulation of knowledge and experience that makes you as good as you are. And to be new going into that, you can't expect yourself to be on that level, going back to what Nissa said about asking for help. I worked at a clinic, so you would be around other staff and other kids and you would see them. And so you would maybe look at a super experienced staff that was handling these behaviors on their own because they felt comfortable doing that. And then you would think, oh, I have to do that too. Like I have to handle it on my own too. And I'm like, that's not, not everybody can do that. And everybody has their places where they struggle. And you can't expect yourself to have 10 years worth of knowledge and experience if you don't have it. So again, it's like giving yourself that grace and asking for help and not being afraid to be like, I'm stuck, or like, I need someone to jump in and kind of get us back on track,
Kiki, I'm going to carve a moment out for you in just a second, but I want to piggyback on that just a minute because I want to add something that watching other staff members who are very proficient, especially like when we were talking about play and rapport building and all of that, doesn't mean that their approach is going to work for you. You have to do something that is authentic within yourself. So it's very common for different technicians to engage in rapport building and play a little differently, even if with the same kid, and the same kid adjusts to that. They know when you're being authentic and you're really there versus when you're just going through the motions. So, Kiki, what do you want to say to this?
I think the one thing that I feel I wish I had known and understood before I went over to the clinical side was that I had to change too. We're in a position where we're helping others change, but first we need to change. We might have to unlearn some bad habits now that we're helping others learn new things, learn new skills. Instinctually, I think of a lot of times we tell someone, no, don't do that. And in ABA, we learned that's not effective. We should be telling someone what they should be doing instead. So even those little behaviors within ourselves that need to change, and we don't realize they need to change.
Right. That is so very true. I do remember some training exercises where we're just thrown in a room and you can do anything except say the word no, or any word that means no. And it really magnifies. You're in graduate school and you're so smart and you know so many facts and figures and things like that, but try to get through that exercise. It's difficult, and it's not about you or anything that's wrong with you. If you're having difficulty with that, that's just human. That's human. One of the other things that we talked about earlier is part of the reason for this extra training and this specific conversation is that there's a huge burnout rate in behavior technicians. What do you have to offer for someone who might be struggling with burnout or doesn't even know that might be coming their way? And we want to get them prepared that it is part of life. What are your burnout tips or avoiding burnout tips? I guess would be a better way of saying that.
When I worked in the clinic, we actually had something like on our doors that said like, you made it, it's the end of the day, take a deep breath, talk to somebody if you need to. If you had a hard day, like reach out to your supervisor. And it kind of had like these kind of pointers, but it was also just like, take a breath, like leave it here, like go home and have your home life and don't take whatever frustrations, you may have had toys thrown at you for an hour or something like that. And you've got to be able to take that and walk away from it. Not take it personally, not, bring that and carry it with you because it does build up. So I think just being able to have that kind of end of the day, like, go through the motions of just like bringing yourself down and kind of reflecting on the day, putting it away, and then being able to go home.
And I think another one is honestly just like, take your time off. You get your PTO, use it. And the reason I say that is because I talked to a couple people when I was working as a BT, and they felt bad for taking PTO because, what if the client doesn't get their hours? What if they can't get a fill-in? The company I was at was really great about getting fill-ins. And, if I was out sick or if someone was taking PTO for a week, they'd, fill the client's hours with, whoever was available as needed. But I think that's an important one, because if you're burnt out with the client, you're not going to be providing, 100% as great a service as you could as if you maybe took a couple breaks. So I think that's one. And again, just because I've had people tell me that they felt bad, so they didn't take time off, and just ask for help, for the BCBA, again, kind of what Vanessa said, if you don't understand something, or if you're having specific issues with, a client for whatever reason it may be, don't be afraid to speak up, because if you don't, that is when it starts to kind of, set in, right? So don't be afraid to ask for help, and kind of, even if you're new, been there for a couple of years, it's never a bad idea to reach out. So
my recommendation is to have a support system. I think the work that we do, and I think most people have this in any work, whether it's in human health services or not, but having colleagues that understand what you're going through, that understand the experience, where, you're not worried about HIPAA violations, that you can talk freely about your experience of that day with a particular learner or family, really is helpful. Just having that lifeline to say, I'm on the verge of burnout, or I'm feeling exhausted because X, Y, or Z. It's nice to just have colleagues who understand what you're going through, that you can speak freely with. And I know that aligns with a lot of the work in the literature. I know Plantiview and colleagues have that paper on burnout, where they indicated in the survey, a lot of BCBAs indicated that they had, colleagues that they had access to, or cohorts they could work with. It helped them sustain at their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, it's, going back to not being able to take things personally. And I think being able to talk to other clinicians and more experienced clinicians really helped me with that. One of the first kids I worked with, we were in home, and the dad said something to him like, well, she's just trying to do her job. And he goes, she's doing a terrible job. And so I felt really bad, I was like, oh my gosh, he doesn't like me. We're not, making progress. And I had to take myself out of it and not take it so personally. Because kids will use profanity at you. They will say very mean things about you. They will find that button and push it. And so being able to have other clinicians say it's not you, it's the autism talking. That's the behaviors. That's not that kid per se. Tomorrow you'll be their favorite person. You'll move on and everything will be fine, but I think when you are so personally invested, and all of us said, we fell in love with the job and fell in love with the kid, it's really hard when you're like, man, they really did not like me today, or, they said something really mean about me, or they did that, I don't want you today, something like that. It's really hard not to take that personally. And so being able to kind of separate that piece out of yes, I can, love my job and be passionate, but I have to be able to look at the behavioral piece and compartmentalize it a little bit, so that I'm not going home oh, I'm the worst person in the world, because some days it will feel like that.
100%. Yeah. Kiki, what you got for us?
Yeah, I think in the same breath as everyone else, communication is going to be your best move when it comes to burnout. Recognizing that you are reaching this level of frustration, or maybe becoming more emotional in sessions, I think that's the point where you need to reach out to your BCBA or your supervisor and even ask, can I run a pairing session today? Just communicate and advocate for yourself. Tell them the honest truth that I'm not feeling like myself today, or I'm feeling really run down. I'm feeling really exhausted. There's still a way to have an effective session and serve that child while we're not feeling so great. Maybe we can pull back just a bit on the programming and focus on that relationship. a session focused on building rapport is never a waste. The more trust that client has in you, it's just going to benefit the program and their treatment, and we're going to see their skills increase down the line. It's okay to pause today to take care of ourselves, and maybe that client might need a break too. It's okay for them to see that, hey, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I take it easy. That's a great lesson for the client to learn.
That's such good advice. This is one of those places that I feel a lot of passion, because it's when we talk about self-care, we so often go to things like bubble bath, spa day. I don't know, Bradley.
Go to the golf course.
Bradley loves the spa day.
I'm crazy for a massage, It really hits different.
Glass of wine, glass of beer, whatever it is. But I have moved so far beyond believing in those things at this point. Because what you're going to learn in your training is how to do a preference assessment for your clients. I really think you can take those ideas and apply them to yourself. And that just means really looking and seeing, what does bring my stress level down? What does make me be able to separate from something that happened and stop ruminating over it? What does help me to restore my energy when I'm run down? You don't have to follow a plan that is nail care or whatever. Sometimes it's going to be something that is actually happening at work. So it may not even be outside of work. There might be just a little change that you can make while you're at work, because this way of doing things super elevates me and this way does not. So tying everything together that all of you said, make sure that you are talking to your supervisor about the parts of the session that is really not going well for you. Make sure that you do take your time off. You need that. Make sure that you have good boundaries, because it's not always even the kid that is stressing you, right? Sometimes it's coworkers, sometimes it's supervisors, and sometimes, if you're working in a family home, it may be that. We have a lot of really strong relationships. We spend the majority of our life at work. So working on those sorts of things is going to make a huge difference for you, even if you can't bolt at the moment and you really feel like you do need to. Did any of you guys do in-home?
I was only in-home, so.
Okay, so I never did that. I'm really curious to hear you guys talk about the boundary portion of working in home. I see some big head nods.
So much to say. That's a whole topic. I think going back to the things I didn't know I needed to know, so I started in home as well. And I think, this touches a bit on what everyone has said. Not knowing that you're going to fall in love with a client, that you're going to, I don't want to say enmesh, because then that throws up the ethics flag of like multiple relationships, but you are going to get so connected with the learner and the family and the outcome, and that's social validity. And, early on when I started, I didn't know any of those terms. I was a young undergraduate student, not even in this field. I didn't know about multiple relationships and all of these ethical concerns that could happen. And again, this is pre the ethics code. So I was driving clients everywhere. I was dealing with things that we don't deal with in today's ABA. However, there is a component of working at home that is just so socially significant for that particular learner. I know we've moved towards clinic-based services, so this could be, a lot of people could be anti this conversation, but the work that you do in home is the student or the client's real life, right? They're encountering the contingencies that they're going to encounter when you walk out the door. The family is home, it's busy, dogs are there, and that relationship you're building with the family because someone is present is one that really impacts you as a technician in a way that just doesn't happen in the clinic, because you get to see all of those variables and work in those variables that are unique to the learner that you cannot contrive in a clinic-based setting. But I know a lot of people are against it. I loved it. I think it shaped how I grew as a clinician and how I view treatment that we provide. I think there's a place and time for clinic-based services as well, but the in-home portion for me is just a strong passion.
When you say people are against it, why?
I think it depends on the team. So I work clinically currently where I see teams in clinic and in home, and if you are in home and you don't have support. So if your BCBA comes very infrequently, if the home setting, isn't conducive to treatment, where it's more of a barrier because you've got one specific area and you can't go anywhere else. There are a lot of barriers that make it hard, and you have to be a strong clinician to overcome those barriers, to apply treatment without your BCBA there consistently, without any BCBA. And then also you're under the microscope of a parent. When I started, the families I worked with had cameras in the bedrooms. And again, I was hired by parents who were trained better than I was. And I had a mom, and I love her. I'm hoping she watches this. I might send this episode to her. I ran a trial where I said, what is this? It's a sock, but it was supposed to be touch the sock. There were no more than 5 seconds that passed before she sprinted in the room and said, that is an RD program. You ran it incorrectly. Let me show you. And I remember being a young grad student, like, oh my gosh, I read it wrong. I ran it as it was completely incorrect. But that is really, it humbles you as a technician to have a microscope where someone's watching and really judging every component of your intervention. But I think it means the parent is super invested, if that's the parent that's watching. They're very much like, I want to know everything that's happening at the table. I want to run it as well. So I could go on.
Yeah, you've got that type of parent, and then you've got the parents that just seem really uninvolved and uninterested, and they can hear you, having going through a behavior with the kiddo, and they're just kind of like, okay, they don't offer to help, or they don't ask if you're okay, or they just kind of like are there. So I feel like if you work in enough homes, you kind of see that there's a spectrum of, parent involvement as well. And so you have to manage that because, you want the parents to be involved. So it does get hard if you have something you're supposed to work out with the parent and they're like, oh, not right now. And you're like, okay, like, you don't always know, like, do I push it? Do I just be fine with it and let the BCBA handle it? Those are really hard things to figure out in the moment, especially if you're a newer BT or RBT and trying to navigate that home situation. We had other siblings in the mix where, they're like, well, why don't I get somebody to come play with me too? And so they're constantly trying to like get into your session and take it off the rails. Or, you have maybe multiple clients that you serve in the same home. I worked with lots of siblings. And so you would go from one brother to the other brother. And so I spent with one family like 30 hours a week in their home. They always used to joke that I should just move in, because I was there so much. And it was hard when you're spending that much amount of time with a family to keep that boundary, because you want to have trust, you want to have rapport. And the line between that and those multiple relationships is really fine, and it's not always easy to see.
Yeah, really. I never had to do those. I did supervise some in-home services back in the days when there were only like 3 BCBAs. And yeah, the other thing that came to my mind is you have parents who are super isolated. That's it. You're the only person that they see. And they really need somebody. And sometimes it's very hard to kind of break away from what might start out with them telling you what happened in your absence to all of their emotions about that, the way that it's affecting the whole family. And so I would just encourage you, if you are experiencing that, make sure your BCBA is aware, because it may be that parent actually needs some services that we could refer for. But any magic words that you guys have to be able to shift those conversations and move back into what you were doing, I think our listeners probably would be really aware and interested in hearing from you guys on how to make that shift.
When families or parents, caregivers overshare or start to cross boundaries, that information can be very insightful. We as professionals have to make sure that we're centering the conversation back to the client. But if there is something in there that needs to be passed along to a supervisor, maybe there is going to be a change in the family dynamic, and services are going to have to be reduced or moved to a new location. Or maybe we're going to have to start programming some specific goals to prepare this client for entering a new school because something is going on. So it's a fine line to walk because we don't want to shut the family out. We want to hear what they have to say, but sometimes what they're sharing might veer into more of a personal territory. So we just need to be prepared to, pull it back to like, hey, so how will this impact so and so? Making sure that we're centering the conversation back on the client. But if there is something useful in there for our BCBA to know or our admins to know, making sure that we do pass that along as well.
Something that took me too long to learn as the supervisor of this person who was getting drowned like that is a session schedule worked miracles. To walk in and say, have it all plotted out by time. This is what I'm going to be doing. These are when my breaks are going to be. If you want to observe now, if you want to ask me questions, if you want to have time with me to tell me what's going on, and set a timer. I mean, I'm sorry, I got to go. I think that was actually helpful, and I was embarrassed about how long it took me to think of it.
Yeah, I think going into it and being like, hey, I've got like 2 minutes before we dive in. Mm-hmm. Give me the rundown, and kind of like letting them know ahead of the time, like, I'm not here to chat for 20 minutes. I've got like 2 minutes. Give me the bullet points of like how things have been or how the weekend was or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shannon, kind of what I thought is obviously with clients use a lot of priming, like, hey, 30 seconds, then work, the minute, 2 minutes. And I know I had this stood out with one client I had specifically because I started as BT in 2019. Obviously COVID hit, like a few months later. And so not only were we in home, we were also kind of isolating. And so the families weren't seeing a lot of people. And this family specifically had also just moved to California from Kentucky. So it was COVID. They weren't meeting anyone. They also just didn't know anyone in the area. So I was like literally one of the few people they'd see. And the mom was extremely social. I mean, great family. Kid was also an absolute genius, by the way. They were fantastic to work with, but she always wanted to chat. And so something I found is that when I was talking with her, there's either one, just kind of directing the conversation to like an ABA topic, and then that kind of naturally flows to the client. But also if they're, maybe they're doing a reinforcement, let's be honest, sometimes clients just want a break. They just want to play by themselves or something. Or maybe you're just going to say, hey, you play, I have to talk to mom. By priming the client and just saying, go, mom, 1 second, telling the 1 minute, then work. That's kind of also giving the parents an indirect warning that, hey, I'm going to start working again in a minute here. So I think it kind of goes both ways. It's a great ABA strategy to use with clients anyway with transitions. But when you have like a chatty parent or anything, it also goes that way because you're indirectly telling them, hey, in a minute, I have to go work with the kid again. So that one kind of found helped a lot. No magic words, unfortunately, but that one worked pretty well for me.
That reminds me, Bradley. I don't know if anybody else had this experience, but I worked with a few different clients whose parents were also on the spectrum. So you were with the client, but then you were also kind of ABAing with the parent as well, because maybe they didn't pick up on some of those cues when you'd be like, okay, well, I gotta go, so you'd have to be kind of really direct, or you'd have to say, 1 more minute, I got 1 more minute and then I gotta go, something like that. But I don't know did you guys ever have that, like with working with parents who are also on the spectrum?
I don't know if I ever had families disclose that, but I found in home very much like the topic we're having, a lot of learners do require a schedule of some sort because, again, this is their natural environment where there is no schedule when you're not there. So a lot of my in-home learners, it's just in these hours that I'm here, here's the schedule we're going to build together, and then sharing that with the parents, saying, at 2:00, we're actually going to go out for a walk to the park. Can you join us? And maybe during that walk, you and I can catch up, and then I can let the BCBA know anything that you want me to let them know. But giving that schedule to the family so they understand when they can step in is always helpful. And then the learner benefits from that as well.
Liz, I don't know. I mean, I probably did, but like Nissa said, oftentimes that doesn't get disclosed to you. But I did learn somewhere along the way that this is one of those things that is, again, like, why did it take a long time to learn that? Our training is very much focused on a certain type of interaction. that is nurturing, right? But not everybody wants that. And some family members would rather you just be very cut and dry. Just look at them and say, I'm sorry about that. I got to go to work now. Whereas others need to do a little softer, soft sell of it. And with parent training too, I had parents who you really had to force and model and lead along. And then I had parents who, I mean, one person always comes to mind who was a CEO type. He wanted everything just like this, and don't soft sell it. Just tell me exactly what I'm doing wrong and let me go fix it. So you do have to kind of take their lead in how they want to receive information and reflect it back to them in their way. And I know BTs aren't doing parent training, but there's a lot of interaction and a lot of questions that get asked. So just bear that in mind, that even though you might be trying to do things one way, sometimes you're going to get someone who's going to want it delivered in another way. Yeah.
I think summing everything up that we talked about and thinking about RBT CEUs and ethics for RBTs, one of the things that I loved way back when was that I wasn't the supervisor. I couldn't make the decision. That is beyond my scope of competence. Let me get my supervisor to help you with that. Thank you for sharing, and let me turn it right back.
Yeah.
I think that's a great, crutch when BTs or RBTs are feeling like they're unsure of what to do. Let me check in. I've got someone here who can help out.
The answer to most all questions that are ethics related to RBT services is it's always going to be safe to say, ask your supervisor, talk to your supervisor, defer to your supervisor. But in reality, we put a lot on the shoulders of supervisors. And especially that RBT to supervisor relationship. Truth be known, most supervisors don't have a lot of experience either these days, right? So what do we have? I am sure one of the frustrations sometimes is that all of these expectations of supervisors kind of paint them as superhuman. They can't possibly do all of that. And some of them aren't going to have as much experience even as the BTs that they are supervising. I'm imagining that is a bit stressful for the behavior technicians. So let's talk about managing up. Like, what happens if that supervisor isn't able to respond in an ideal way?
That's a hard one. I've seen this play out in a couple of my own work experiences, and it's a hard dynamic, especially if the technician has more experience than the BCBA. Perhaps they were colleagues, or this is a brand new BCBA from another state, another company that just stepped in, and this technician has been around for a while. It takes a lot of coaching on both ends to say, yes, you've got the experience, and share the company culture with this individual because maybe they're brand new to the organization. However, we do need to respect that this is the supervisor on the case. They wrote the treatment plan. They've submitted that. They're on the hook for all of the goals that are submitted. But then it goes back to asking questions. If you are a technician managing up and you are questioning interventions and treatment, you might just ask, can you clarify? Can you model? Can you share with me why this goal is in here so I can run it more efficiently? So going all the way back to treatment fidelity, I want to make sure I'm running the program the way you wrote it, and I'm misinterpreting maybe. I think that's a good way to allow the BCBA to really share their expertise and their insight into why they designed the program.
We get a lot of people use our feedback forms sometimes to tell us, what's going wrong in the field. And one of the most commonly kind of side questions that comes through is, what do I do when my supervisor won't listen? Whether it is they're doing something like an extinction program, and these days we don't necessarily go directly to those kinds of things. So what do you do, I guess, when there's a values difference and the supervisor doesn't adhere to your same set of values?
Yeah, that's hard. I think focusing on the fact that you're supposed to be a team, it's not us versus them. Like, we're a team, not just the BCBA, but all the RBTs and the family. We're all working together for one purpose, which is to help this client. And so I think always bringing it back to that and making sure we're centering the client and all of those conversations kind of takes that, like, I'm not questioning you, and I'm not saying what you're wanting to do is wrong. I'm asking you, can you explain to me a little bit more about why you chose to do this and why you think it's right for this kiddo? And just, I found sometimes just like complimenting them, be like, you're so good at writing behavior plans. Like, I really want to be able to learn some more, and kind of like taking it into that realm. And you will get some supervisors that are super open. I think the first time I had a supervisor go, well, what do you think? I was like, what do you mean what I think? Like, nobody had asked me that before. And so you get some that are very willing to collaborate with you, and you get some that would rather just kind of give you the direction. But I think as long as you're centering it back to that client, and everybody's intention is to help them and do the right thing, I think as long as you keep that in your mind and keep that centered, I think you'll be able to figure it out most of the time.
Yeah, and I think from an in-home perspective, and Shannon, kind of what you said kind of rang the bell, but like extinction as an example, I know like an in-home, you're not going to have, you don't have coworkers, whether it's a BCBA or other BTs around as much. And so, you're just going to be you and the client more often than not. And I think when it comes like an extinction, just as a straight example here, it's kind of, is that strategy in there increasing like the magnitude and severity of behaviors, or other behaviors popping up? Is it just not as optimal? And I think, again, I didn't work in center, so this is just strictly like an in-home answer, is just ask the BCBA to come out for an overlap. So if you can not necessarily show what's happening, but if they see it live, that kind of gives a better direction of where you can take things, instead of just, messaging on Teams of saying, hey, this is happening, or X is happening, Y is happening. Being able to kind of tackle it live and be there for the session, I think, solve, quote unquote, may not happen, but at least puts you both on the same page, more likely so, than just kind of communicating, over Teams. Again, center, probably Liz and Kiki, you can answer that one better, but at least in home, I think just having either more frequent overlaps, or maybe if the BCBA hasn't been there for a while, have them come out for one so you can kind of tackle it together. That's kind of the best advice that I would have with kind of those specific issues.
Yeah, I think that RBTs, sometimes we do need to assert ourselves as collaborators. Maybe the BCBA wrote a program we don't 100% agree with, or we don't fully understand. We can ask for our clarification. They're likely going to want us to implement. I say implement it, and then give them your feedback. After a week, so-and-so still isn't responding to these prompts. What if we tried XYZ? So I would say give your BCBA's programs a chance after you've gotten that clarification, but also be ready to give them that feedback. You're the one working one-on-one with that learner, so you have the insight of how they are actually responding. And is this goal even appropriate yet? You might say, hey, you know what? They weren't ready to label it, but they were ready to match. Can we take a step back? The feedback, your BCBA should be open to that, because that's going to help them fine tune that programming and help that learner.
And I think going off of that, you also have to give a little grace to your supervisor. And you have to at least be open-minded to the program that they're writing. And, maybe they've worked with this kiddo for like 2 years, and you're just coming in, like you've been there a couple weeks with them, and they're putting in extinction because we've tried these 10 other things. And so for this kiddo, it might be more appropriate to do that. But if I don't have that information, I'm going to go, oh, well, why are we doing this? That's not appropriate. Well, it might be if I do the history. So I guess being able to have those conversations, and I guess give the supervisor that benefit of the doubt, like, hey, like, I noticed we're doing extinction, and that's not like something we typically do. Like, what have we tried in the past? So you can kind of get me up to speed on like how we arrived at this intervention, because you might find after the fact, this might be the best option, even though it's, seems like it wouldn't be, the first option. Maybe it's not the first option. Maybe this is like the 10th go round, and this is where we've landed because we've tried all these other things. So, being able to not go into it like confrontational per se, or, making sure that you have that open mind of like, I want to learn, like, I want you to teach me, why we have arrived at this intervention.
I'm so glad you said that, because I do also teach in a master's program, and sometimes my students are BTs who are working on their BCBA, and we'll go over something and they'll say, we don't do it like that. And they oftentimes want to have a conversation with me about that, but I can't have that conversation because, just like you said, there's a whole history there that I don't know how your BCBA got to where they are. So I think the lesson here is, even if you know something and you have a thought, and it might even be a very good thought, everything's going to rest back again to your relationship. Mm-hmm. So developing a really good relationship with your supervisor, just like you would with the kids that you're serving, is going to work out very well for you, no matter what. So any good tips and tricks, if you don't have that constant interaction that you do with a supervisor, how can you work on building that relationship when you have intermittent contact? I think it's something that worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely kind of going back to when I was working COVID and in home. Yeah, obviously the BCBAs were coming out, but we couldn't have them out every day for kind of quarantine reasons and everything. But what helped a lot there is just kind of giving them periodic updates. Like, you don't have to message them every session of how it went, but if you give them like a week summary of, hey, this is how session went, just so you know, on Tuesday this happened. Obviously if you have like a e-data system or something like that. I started on pen and paper, by the way. That's where this really kind of helped a lot. When you have like a system, you kind of put notes in, keep those notes updated. Or if you don't have that, send them an occasional message of just how things are going, because the data may say one thing, maybe they're looking at graphs all the time. But if you give them updates like, oh, hey, they started school, they switched schools, or even just like, hey, things have been going well, brother's been a little sick, so things have been a little off. I think if you just give them insight like that, that helps a lot, because they can see past, obviously in ABA, the data tells, the story, right? But there's always the narrative right below it, right? So I think if you can keep them as looped in as possible in the case, it makes their job a lot easier. And if they don't have to constantly reach out of saying, hey, I see this program's been, just taking a dive and behaviors are spiking, what's going on? As long as you can keep them updated on that. And they, of course, have deadlines, on reports and everything. So if you can give them even more insight to help them reach those deadlines and make their job easier, that goes a long way. So I really just think kind of keeping them in the loop when you don't have that constant contact, you're not seeing them in the center every day, just passing by as coworkers even, that goes a long way and helps them a lot.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, a good little text message or something like that, or an email goes a long way. I mean, when I was in homes, it would maybe be like, hey, like, I have a break where I'm driving from this time to this time. Do you have 5 minutes so I can just catch you up on something, or saying, hey, like, when would you have time to, chat about this? And making sure that you are proactively, reaching out and making sure that you are making that information available to them. And not only that, but again, it goes back to the burnout, right? You have to have something to talk about. You have to say, hey, this was a really hard session. We had all these different behaviors that I haven't seen before, or, something was really off and with the family, dad was out of town for work, something like that. Like, it's good to be able to have that conversation, because it impacts the client's treatment. It impacts you as a clinician. You might learn something you didn't know before. It's going to help you with your burnout. Like, you got to be able to have those conversations with people, especially when you're in home, because it is very isolating. Like Bradley said, like, you could go days in a row without really seeing any other coworker or supervisor. So it's really important to make sure that you have those connections outside of the therapy session.
Yeah, so really going into a relationship, an RBT BCBA relationship, the communication style needs to be established. How can I best reach you in between sessions? Is it going to be email? Is the BCBA going to provide their work line so that you can text them? So establishing that, or even establishing like every month we're going to have a half-hour video call, whatever it's going to be. Make sure that that is established at the beginning of your professional relationship so that you know how to contact them, and you have maybe some sort of recurring contact that you can save things for.
You know, I also want to just say, remember that your supervisor is a human being, so they function on operant principles. And if you are always reaching out to them with a problem, even the best of us is going to start feeling that, seeing you as an aversive rather than as a positive. So reach out with, hey, that change you made a huge difference. Thank you so much. This program you wrote is flying. I really appreciate it. The other day when I was stressed out and you picked up the phone, it made such a huge difference. I felt so much better later. And it's easy to forget to do that stuff because we are flying. We really are. But everybody is still a human, and those little things do make a difference. I know they made a difference on me.
Yeah, BCBAs need feedback too. They need their positive reinforcement as well.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you to this group. This has been a really good talk. I feel like we could do even more on deeper plunges on all of those, but we touched on quite a few different areas. And those of you who are RBTs and new CEU seekers, use your feedback form. Go on to CR Institute and do what you need to do. There's an opportunity to leave feedback and requests. Let us know, what are the topics that are burning for you? What do you want more information about? We're building that catalog now, and we make sure that we're meeting your needs. So I want to say thanks again to this group, and everybody going to come back to do the episode for the supervisors.
Yep.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
I'll be here.
I love putting people on camera and then putting them on the spot and asking them. But thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the Behavioral View.
Thanks for joining us for the Behavioral View. Subscribe and join us for the next episode. We'll see you soon.